Pick that up, sweetheart. That is what Dr. Caldwell said 17 minutes before everything changed. The VA hospital in Houston hums with the particular frequency of fluorescent lights that never quite shut off, a sound like electricity humming through copper wire, a sound that lives in your teeth after 8 hours. Ashley Cooper moves through the corridors with the kind of silence that comes from knowing how to take up as little space as possible. Her scrubs are standard issue, pale blue, institutional, anonymous. Nobody looks twice at a nurse in pale blue scrubs. That is the entire point. Room 347 is on the 3rd floor, East Wing. The walls have been painted a color someone decided was calming, a shade of beige that looks like surrender. Ashley pushes the medication cart, wheels squeaking softly against linoleum worn smooth by 20 years of footsteps, and pauses at the threshold. The chart says Army Ranger, shrapnel wounds to the lower left abdomen, admitted 4 days ago. Recovery progressing. That part is true. What the chart doesn't say is that this particular Army Ranger was 8 years old the last time she saw him, covered in concrete dust, his small hands gripping her neck while the building collapsed around them both. Marcus Webb is awake. That wasn't expected. The vital sheet indicated sedation, indicated rest, indicated he should be sleeping off the morphine drip. But there he is, propped slightly upright, his eyes tracking the movement of the 4-line tape to his wrist as if he's trying to make sense of a foreign object on his own body. The shrapnel caught him in the lower left quadrant, 3 centimeters from the femoral artery. A fraction of a second slower and he would have bled out in the street. A fraction of a second faster and the shrapnel misses entirely. Life runs on fractions of seconds. Morning, Ranger. Ashley's voice is level, professional, carrying exactly the tone that makes patients feel like they're being taken care of by someone who has done this 10,000 times before. I'm going to check your vitals. You're going to hold still. Sound good? She doesn't wait for him to answer. She moves to the 4-line first, checking the flow rate, 17 milliliters per hour, within tolerance, and then to the cardiac monitor. The rhythm is steady. Sinus. The heart monitor beeps its metronome rhythm, beep, 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 like a clock counting down to nothing in particular. She places her palm on his abdomen, carefully, just above the surgical dressing. The wound is warm but not hot. No fever. The staples are holding. His body hasn't rejected the repair. Yet. How's the pain? She asks, already knowing he will underreport it. They always do. Rangers especially. Rangers are trained to lie about pain the same way they're trained to lie about fear, to convert everything sharp and terrible into a number they can manage. Fine, Marcus says. It's exactly what she expected. I've had worse. He hasn't. Nobody his age has had worse. But Ashley nods like she believes him, because the therapy doesn't work unless they believe you believe them. She makes a notation on the chart. The handwriting is precise, military precise, the kind of documentation that leaves no room for interpretation. Wound status, clean. Vitals, stable. Pain management, adequate. She writes like someone who understands that the wrong word in the wrong chart can mean the difference between a patient getting help and a patient getting forgotten. She is halfway through charting Marcus's numbers when she notices it again. Room 348. The medication order Dr. Caldwell signed off on yesterday. Morphine dosage for a patient who weighs 84 kilograms. The dosage he prescribed is 3 times what the protocol allows. 3 times. Ashley has the protocol memorized. She has everything memorized. 20 years of combat medicine means you learn to carry entire pharmacopoeias in your head because there are no computers in Marja, no wireless internet in a forward operating base, just you and your memory and someone's life in your hands. The discrepancy is not an accident. Accidents don't happen 3 times in 4 days. Accidents don't follow a pattern. The pattern says Dr. Caldwell is billing for medications that either don't exist or exist at dosages that would kill the patient. The pattern says someone is getting paid for the difference. The pattern says the VA hospital in Houston has a problem that runs deeper than a single careless doctor. Ashley makes a notation anyway. She flags the order. She attaches a comment in the system: dosage exceeds protocol, recommend review by Chief of Pharmacy. The comment will be read by approximately 0 people before being deleted. The flag will be noted by Dr. Caldwell, and he will understand exactly what it means. It means Ashley Cooper has a memory that won't let things go. She finishes her shift at 7 in the evening. The sun is hanging low over Houston, turning the parking lot the color of old blood. She walks to her locker in the staff room, a room that smells like old coffee and the plastic chemical scent of hand sanitizer, a room designed to feel temporary even though some of the people who work here have been walking through these doors for 30 years. Her locker is in the back corner, the one nobody claims, the one with the broken lock that she's learned to open with the right angle of pressure and the right amount of patience. Inside is the coin. She takes it out without looking around first. There's no need to look around. She's been doing this every evening for 4 days, and nobody pays attention to nurses opening their lockers. Nurses are background. Nurses are the people you forget about between appointments. It's a useful thing to be. The challenge coin is the color of old bronze gone dark with time. The weight of it is impossible, heavier than any object that size should be, as if it's carrying the weight of more than just the metal itself. One side bears the insignia of a unit that doesn't exist on any official roster, surrounded by text in languages that haven't been spoken in combat zones for 2 decades. The other side shows a series of numbers and a name: Marcus Webb. Marja. 2009. She was 26 years old when she pulled him out of the rubble. The building had collapsed during a secondary explosion, someone's follow-up to an initial IED, the kind of attack designed to kill the people who show up to help after the first explosion. She was helping. The rubble had shifted. The building had come down on top of a marketplace where a child was standing with his mother. The child's mother didn't survive. The child had. Ashley had held him in her arms, filthy, screaming, bleeding from a laceration on his scalp, and she had looked into his eyes and made a promise she had no right to make. "I'm going to teach you how to be a soldier," she had said. "Just like me. You're going to survive this. You're going to grow up. You're going to be the strongest person you know. You understand me?" He had nodded. A child covered in concrete dust had nodded because that was what you did when an adult with a gun told you to be strong. She had pressed the coin into his small palm, a coin she had carried for 4 years, a coin that meant something to the men and women in her unit, a coin that was worth more than any medal because it was hers and she was giving it to him. "This is so you don't forget," she had said. "This is so you remember that you survived. This is so you remember me." She was supposed to stay disappeared. That was the deal. CIA asset extraction gone sideways in Kandahar, which meant someone needed to vanish. Someone needed to become a person who didn't exist anymore, a person with new paperwork and a new social security number and a new identity buried under so many layers of witness protection that even the Pentagon couldn't find her without making phone calls to people who would prefer she stayed lost. She had agreed because she was good at disappearing. Because 20 years of operating in the shadows had trained her for exactly this kind of vanishing. Because she understood that the alternative was a trial that would compromise 17 active operations and get people killed. So she had become Ashley Cooper. She had become a nurse. She had become someone who existed in the margins, who was quiet and competent and never made anyone uncomfortable. She had become the person that someone like Dr. Caldwell would look right through. Except Dr. Caldwell had looked at her charting and understood that she saw him. The locker door hangs open, her palm still resting on the coin, and she doesn't move for exactly 3 seconds. That's a choice. That's discipline. That's the difference between someone who reacts and someone who has learned not to. In the hallway outside the staff room, someone drops something. It hits the floor with a metallic clang and doesn't break. Probably a bedpan. Probably nothing. But she listens to it the way she used to listen for the sound of engines cutting off before an ambush, the way she used to listen for the absence of sound that meant something was about to happen. The absence of sound is always the warning. She closes the locker. She pockets the coin, small enough to fit in the front pocket of her scrubs, worn smooth enough that it doesn't make noise when it moves. She straightens her uniform, the way someone does when they're preparing for something, though she doesn't yet know what that something is. The lights in the staff room flicker once, a brief stutter in the fluorescent hum, and she notices the way the shadows change with that flicker. She notices everything. It's what 20 years has taught her. It's what keeps you alive when everything else is trying to kill you. By tomorrow, Dr. Caldwell will have made his move. By tomorrow, the situation will have escalated beyond a simple flag on a medication order. By tomorrow, everything will shift into the kind of game where there are no rules except the ones that the people in power decide to make, and the only winning move is to play better than they do. But that evening, walking to her car in the Houston parking lot, Ashley Cooper lets herself feel the weight of the coin one more time. She holds it between her fingers the way a gambler holds a lucky chip. She thinks about a child covered in concrete dust. She thinks about an 8-year-old boy who wanted to be a soldier. She thinks about the fact that he's upstairs in room 347, recovering from injuries that should have killed him, and he still doesn't know that the nurse checking his vitals was the woman who taught him how to survive. The hospital behind her glows with the white light of 1,000 fluorescent bulbs. Inside the building, Dr. Caldwell is somewhere in his office, probably reviewing the charts she flagged, probably calculating how much damage she can do to his operation if she keeps charting the truth. Inside that building, the next 17 minutes are already written, already set in motion, already waiting to play out. She gets in her car. She drives home through the Houston traffic, past streetlights and brake lights and the endless glow of the city itself. And she thinks about what happens when someone from your past shows up in a place where you've learned to be invisible. She thinks about the fact that sometimes the world has a sense of irony that feels less like luck and more like a warning. The challenge coin sits in her pocket, heavy and real and impossible, and it whispers things that she's been trying not to hear for 4 days straight. The cafeteria at St. Michael's Virginia Hospital smells like industrial gravy and burnt coffee, the kind of smell that lives in the walls after 20 years of fluorescent-lit meals and the quiet desperation of people who've learned to eat without tasting. It's 12:11 p.m. on a Thursday, and the lunch rush has crested into that strange middle hour where the nursing staff gravitates toward the same tables in clusters, their scrubs color-coded by department, their conversations the low murmur of people too tired to project their voices beyond their own circle. Ashley fills her tray with methodical precision. Salad. Grilled chicken. Water. No flourish, no preference visible in her selections, just fuel calculated the same way she once calculated rations for a fire team in Helmand Province. She stands in line behind a respiratory therapist and 2 pediatric nurses, her presence so unremarkable that people's eyes slide past her like she's furniture. This is intentional. This is survival. Dr. Caldwell enters the cafeteria at 12:51 p.m. wearing his white coat like a general's dress uniform, his Italian shoes clicking against the tile with the confidence of someone who has never been questioned in his own domain. He carries a tray he won't eat, his dominance is visible, not consumable, and he moves toward the cluster of nursing staff near the windows with the trajectory of a man who has decided this will be an audience. Ashley watches this from her peripheral vision while maintaining her focus on the salad bar, her hand steady on the tongs, her breathing unchanged. "I'll bet anyone here $50, Caldwell's voice projects across the packed tables, cutting through conversation like a blade, that our little Florence Nightingale doesn't last the week. She's too soft for this work." The laughter starts with the surgical nurses, then spreads like contagion, that particular kind of laughter that exists only to validate a superior's cruelty. It's the sound of a room recognizing hierarchy and choosing which side of it they want to survive on. Ashley's jaw tightens imperceptibly, a single muscle fiber, maybe 2, tensing for less than a second before her face returns to absolute neutrality. Her hands don't pause. She places her plate on the tray with the same measured care she would use handling an open wound. She moves toward the checkout counter, and that's when Caldwell walks past her. It's not an accident. The angle is too precise, the timing too calculated. His shoulder catches her tray in what an observer might describe as a passing bump, but it's violence dressed in carelessness. Her tray tilts, and gravity does the rest. Carrots scatter across the tile floor like casualties, the salad bowl shattering against the hard surface with a sound that is somehow both loud and utterly ignored by everyone around her. The plastic cup tumbles away, rolling under a table. Clumsy, he says, loud enough for the entire cafeteria to process his judgment. He doesn't break stride. He doesn't look back. Ashley kneels to clean it up. Her movements are economical, practiced, the kind of efficiency that comes from having operated in spaces where hesitation costs lives. She collects the pieces of broken ceramic without flinching at the edge that cuts her thumb, a thin line of blood mixing with salad dressing on her palm, unremarked and unaddressed. The other nurses avert their eyes. Some whisper. One woman actually looks uncomfortable, but discomfort is not the same as intervention, and the moment passes like weather. Ashley wipes her hands on a paper towel, disposes of the debris, and walks out without a replacement meal. Her caloric deficit for the day is now 847 calories. She's done more with less. That afternoon, she brings patient files to Dr. Caldwell's office. He's requested them, some pharmaceutical review he mentioned in passing, nothing unusual, the kind of administrative task that flows through every hospital department like blood through a body. She knocks. He doesn't look up from his computer. She enters because that's what she's been trained to do: follow orders, maintain posture, present yourself with the kind of invisibility that keeps you alive in rooms where you're not wanted. Just leave them on the desk, he says, still focused on his screen. She places the files in the center of his workspace. 7 folders, each one meticulously organized, her handwriting precise as a military ledger, every notation cross-referenced, every pharmaceutical transaction documented with the kind of attention that comes from 20 years of running logistics in combat zones where a single error could have killed 17 people under your command. The files are not just neat. They are damning. Caldwell glances at them, and something shifts in his posture. It's subtle. A tightening around the eyes. A pause that lasts maybe 1.3 seconds longer than it should. He reaches for the files, flips through them, and then his face hardens into something that looks like anger but reads like recognition. He throws the entire stack at her feet. Charts scatter across the carpet, some sliding under the desk, others landing face down in that particular way that spreads chaos across a floor. The papers separate from their folders. His calendar pages fall out and scatter like autumn leaves. Her month of work, documented with the precision of someone trained to survive court-martial, reduces to nothing in 3 seconds of deliberate destruction. Pick that up, he says. His voice is different now, stripped of the public performance. This is the voice underneath. And redo every single one. Your handwriting is unacceptable. The word sweetheart is not there, but it hangs in the air like smoke anyway. Diminishment. Condescension. The specific tone reserved for women in spaces where power is absolute and questioned only by the brave or the suicidal. Ashley crouches to collect the files. Her knuckles whiten for half a second, the only visible sign that her nervous system has registered the impact of what just happened, and then the whiteness fades as she achieves breath control. She stacks the folders with parade ground precision, each one a line perpendicular to the next, her hands moving with the kind of muscle memory that doesn't require her mind's permission. Caldwell watches with satisfaction, his breathing steady, his power confirmed by her compliance. He has no idea that every movement she makes is being catalogued, every instance of his behavior being filed away in a memory trained on Sanjin Valley triage and midnight operations that still have redacted names in government archives. She takes the files and leaves without speaking, because words are weapons in this room and hers are currently locked in a vault somewhere under the Pentagon. Alone in the supply closet later that evening, she allows her hands to grip the metal shelf hard enough that the surface bends slightly under her palms. The trembling that comes is not fear. It's restraint. It's the contained energy of someone trained to respond to verbal abuse with lethal force, choosing instead to bend metal, choosing instead to feel the cold steel bite into her skin rather than allow her survival training to evaluate Dr. Caldwell as a legitimate target for the skills that once kept her alive in Marja. Her face never changes, but her hands shake with the effort of staying human, of remembering that civilian healthcare is not a combat zone, that the rules are different, that the cost of protecting yourself is the job you need. She reaches into her pocket and touches the tarnished military challenge coin, feeling its weight like ballast. The metal is warm from her body heat. It reminds her of something, a promise made to a child, a vow kept across years, a reason that extends beyond her own survival into a hospital room on the 3rd floor where someone is counting on her presence, her competence, her absolute commitment to the people she's sworn to protect. She releases the shelf and stands, smoothing her scrubs with the same methodical care she once used to fold the flag over her teammate's body bag. The work continues. The humiliation recedes. But something has shifted in Caldwell's behavior, and she understands exactly why. He's reviewed the files, he's seen the flagged transactions, he's recognized that the quiet nurse has documented every irregular pharmaceutical order for the past 6 weeks with the kind of attention that federal auditors would require. What he doesn't know is that she has already separated copies to secure locations, already established a timeline that would survive legal scrutiny, already prepared for exactly this moment because she was trained by people whose entire lives depended on contingency planning. The next morning, Marcus Webb's cardiac monitor begins its alarm at 2:07 a.m., and Ashley is already moving before the second beep sounds. His chest tube has backed up. His blood pressure has dropped from 118 to 94 in the span of 40 minutes. His neck veins are distended like someone is strangling him from the inside, and his oxygen saturation is falling in increments that are losing him 30 seconds of cerebral perfusion with each percentage point. The on-call resident, Dr. Chen, arrives at bedside with trembling hands and the frozen expression of someone who has read about this situation in textbooks but never encountered it while responsible for a human life. He reaches for the crash cart. He reaches for his phone. He reaches for anything that is not a decision. Ashley is already prepping the subsiphoid approach, her voice carrying the command authority of someone who once ran battlefield triage under fire in Marja where every second of delay was a permanent decision. Betadine. 18-gauge needle. 50 cc syringe. Now, Dr. Chen. Move. It's not a request. It's a command, and Dr. Chen's training recognizes authority when it speaks in that tone, even when it comes from someone wearing scrubs instead of captain's bars. He hands her the materials, and her hands move with the precision of a surgical laser, positioning the needle at the subsiphoid approach, angling 45 degrees toward the left shoulder, advancing until she meets the resistance of pericardial fluid. The hiss of air escaping as she withdraws 70 milliliters of blood is the only sound in the room besides the monitor. Marcus's blood pressure stabilizes immediately. 94 becomes 104. 104 becomes 112. The O2 climbs, 78, 82, 87, 91, steady. The attending physician arrives 6 minutes later, stares at the syringe of blood, stares at the needle angle, stares at Ashley with the expression of someone who has just witnessed a procedure that most cardiac residents can't perform under ideal circumstances, much less at 2 a.m. with a patient in active tamponade. "Where exactly did you train?" the attending asks. Ashley's face remains professionally blank, her voice carrying the flat effect of someone reciting technical specifications. "I read a lot." But the attending is already pulling Marcus's chart, asking questions, requesting her credentialing file, making notes with the kind of attention that suggests this moment is going to echo through St. Michael's administrative channels with the force of something that cannot be ignored. By sunrise, the story has already begun to spread through the nursing staff. The quiet nurse, the one Caldwell mocked in the cafeteria, just performed an emergency pericardiocentesis with the kind of precision that suggests she's done this before, maybe more than once, maybe in circumstances that would require skills well beyond what her resume indicates. Ashley stands at the nurse's station at 6:14 a.m., documenting the procedure in Marcus's chart with the same meticulous attention she applied to Caldwell's pharmaceutical audit, knowing that every word she writes is now going to be scrutinized, knowing that her hidden past is beginning to crack through the surface she's worked so carefully to maintain, knowing that the coin in her locker is no longer just a reminder of a promise made to a child, but a relic of the person she was, the person she's spent for days trying to keep buried under the fiction of being someone forgettable, someone soft, someone who would quit within a week. She has no idea that the real nightmare is only beginning. The monitor alarm screamed at 2 in the morning. Not the soft chirp of a rhythm change, the full-throated shriek of catastrophic failure. Ashley's head lifted from the nurse's station before the second beep, her body already moving muscle memory older than her current identity taking command. The ICU went electric. Nurses converging. Feet on linoleum. The fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent drone above everything. Room 347. Marcus Webb. Her hands were steady as she entered, steadier than they had any right to be given the chaos her mind was cataloguing in real time. 17 years since she'd trained a child in a rubble-strewn compound in Marja. 17 years since she'd pressed a challenge coin into his small palm and watched his eyes fill with the terrible clarity of survival. Now he lay on this hospital bed with his chest cracking open from the inside, blood pooling in the pericardial sac like a slow-motion execution, neck veins distending against paper-thin skin, pressure in his chest climbing with each heartbeat. The on-call resident stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the monitor as though it might change if he concentrated hard enough. His name was Dr. Pierce. Fresh out of his residency. The kind of doctor who'd studied cardiac tamponade in textbooks but never seen one unfold in real time. Blood pressure 72/40 and dropping. Oxygen saturation falling. The resident opened his mouth. Nothing emerged. His hand trembled. Needle. 14-gauge angiocath. Now, Ashley said. Her voice didn't ask. The attending physician, Dr. Marcus Wong, 5 years at St. Michael's, excellent reputation, the kind of man who actually listened, moved toward the supply cart. He understood the moment. He understood the gravity. He understood that the woman in the corner wasn't making a suggestion. She was giving an order. The needle was in her hand before Dr. Wong could fetch it. 71/39. The numbers were dying. She didn't look at the frozen resident or the attending physician hovering at the edge of her peripheral vision. She didn't acknowledge her own hands as they moved, hands that had performed this exact procedure in a field tent outside Kandahar, hands that had done this with a 15-milliliter syringe and a prayer while rounds came in through the canvas walls. This time she had sterile conditions and working electricity. This time the patient wasn't screaming. This time she could breathe. The second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. The anatomy was the same. Always the same. She palpated the landmarks with fingers that read anatomy like Braille, found the precise gap between the ribs, and positioned the needle. The metal was cold against her forearm as she angled the catheter 45 degrees, aiming for the pericardial sac, feeling for the moment when resistance would transform into release. 68/28. She advanced the needle. The world contracted to this single task. The hiss of air as the syringe plunger withdrew. That sound, the sound of a chest reopening, of pressure releasing, of death being held at arm's length for one more breath. Dark blood filled the barrel. Not arterial red. Venous. Tamponade blood. The kind that accumulated in cavities and crushed the heart from outside. The attending physician stepped closer. She didn't acknowledge him. She withdrew the needle, left the catheter in place, connected it to a larger syringe, and continued draining. Each milliliter of blood was a milliliter of pressure surrendering. The monitor showed it first, the numbers climbing. 75. 78. 82. The beeping changed character. The rhythm became steady, became true. Her hands moved through the process with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had done this under fire, done this in the dark, done this while blood soaked through her own uniform. She didn't rush. Rushing was how mistakes happened. Mistakes killed people. By the time she finished, the chest tube drainage had begun flowing clearly again, the reason for the crash, now apparent. Clot formation. The drainage catheter had plugged sometime between midnight and now, pressure accumulating silently until Marcus Webb's heart could no longer pump against the weight of his own blood. 95/60. Sinus rhythm. Normal sinus rhythm. She could hear it in the beeping, the sound of a body choosing to live. Dr. Wong stared at her. His expression had moved past surprise into something more like recalibration. The resident, Dr. Pierce had regained some color in his face, watching as though the impossible had simply rearranged itself into order because one person knew exactly where to stand and what to do. "Where did you learn that?" Dr. Wong's voice was careful, measured, the tone of a man asking a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Ashley didn't look away from Marcus. His oxygen saturation was climbing. 94. 96. His color was returning, the pale waxy look of shock gradually replaced by something approximating human. She documented the procedure in his chart with the same meticulous attention she applied to Caldwell's pharmaceutical audit. Every movement, every measurement, every moment. The words formed on the screen in her precise nurse's handwriting. The attending physician watched her type, and she could feel the weight of his attention like pressure against her back. 20 years of ICU experience, she said quietly. It wasn't a lie. It was a truth compressed into 4 words that opened no doors to the vault beneath the surface. The monitor continued its steady beeping. 98. 100. Marcus Webb's body was going to survive this night. His heart would keep beating. The machinery would keep functioning. For now, the immediate crisis had passed, and she had somehow done what the textbooks said shouldn't be possible. She had held back the dark with nothing but her hands and muscle memory written into her bones 17 years ago. Dr. Wong excused the resident and then pulled Ashley aside in the corridor. The fluorescent lights cast everything in that particular hospital pallor that made everyone look like ghosts. His eyes were analytical now, the kind of careful examination that suggested he was beginning to see something other than a young nurse in scrubs. Your credentials listed you as RN with a Houston Community College associate degree, he said. Not accusatory. Just factual. That procedure was advanced provider level. Critical care transport. Maybe trauma surgery. I've self-studied, Ashley replied. The lie was smaller this time. The truth underneath it vast enough to drown in. Your hands. He paused. You've done that before. Recently. She didn't respond. The silence stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight. I'm not trying to get you in trouble, Dr. Wong continued. I'm trying to understand what I just watched. That wasn't textbook. That was someone who's performed that procedure under conditions most of us will never see. Ashley met his eyes. In them she saw the beginning of recognition, the first crack in the wall she'd spent for days building. He was intelligent. He was observant. He was the wrong kind of person to walk away from this moment not knowing. I appreciate the opportunity to care for my patients, she said. Each word was a stone placed carefully in a wall. I'm grateful to work at St. Michael's. Dr. Wong studied her for another moment, then nodded slowly. I'm going to document this as exceptional clinical judgment and rapid response under pressure. The medication error complaints that came through against you, they don't align with what I just witnessed. The shift in his voice suggested he was building his own narrative, filling in his own blanks, coming to his own conclusions. Ashley could see the moment he decided to protect what he'd seen rather than report it. Professional courtesy. The quiet understanding that sometimes people were more than their paperwork. She returned to the nurse's station at 6:14 in the morning. The incident report was already being filed by Dr. Pierce, who seemed determined to document her performance as evidence that he was part of a resuscitation team rather than someone who'd frozen solid while a woman in a scrubs performed emergency thoracic medicine in an ICU. His account was clinical and accurate. It was also invisible. He described her actions without attribution, details without acknowledgement, as though she'd been a hand holding a syringe rather than the mind guiding it. At 6:42, Dr. Caldwell arrived at St. Michael's for his early rounds. He would have read the incident report on his way in. He would have seen the procedure logged. He would have begun to understand that the woman he'd been dismantling brick by brick had just demonstrated exactly the kind of clinical expertise that made her dangerous, dangerous to his operation, dangerous to his kickback schemes, dangerous to the careful architecture of fraud he'd constructed across pharmaceutical procurement. By 6:59, before Ashley had even finished her documentation, his phone was in his hand. The first call went to Patricia Westin, board member, woman who owed him favors from a golf resort real estate development that had never quite made it off the ground. The second call went to the insurance investigators. The third reached the state medical board's emergency line. The fourth was internal, head of hospital security, requesting a personnel file audit with priority coding. The words would be carefully chosen. The timing would be meticulous. The documentation would be fabricated but thorough. He would allege that Ashley had performed a critical care procedure without appropriate physician supervision, that her credentials were questionable, that her background was unclear, that she posed a liability to the hospital. He would call it patient safety. He would frame it as due diligence. He would call it protection. What he didn't know was that the procedure she'd performed was so clearly documented, so precisely executed, so perfectly appropriate for the crisis at hand, that every allegation he filed would begin to crumble under the weight of evidence. He didn't know that Dr. Wong was already preparing his own incident report. He didn't know that the attending physician who'd witnessed everything would become a careful observer of his actions, watching for the pattern, waiting for the moment when corruption became visible. He didn't know any of it. He only knew that his control was slipping like sand through his fingers, and the woman he'd targeted was beginning to shine through her own disguise. But that wasn't the worst part for him. The worst part was that he had absolutely no idea who he was actually trying to destroy. At 6:13 a.m., Dr. Caldwell sat in his corner office on the 14th floor of St. Michael's Virginia Hospital in Houston, his mahogany desk arranged with the precision of a man who believed order equaled control. His phone sat in front of him like a chess piece he'd already moved. 3 calls. That's all it took. By 6:52 a.m., the chief of the hospital board, a man named Sterling who owed Caldwell favors from a private consulting arrangement that paid exactly $58,000 per quarter, was listening to a carefully constructed narrative about medication documentation errors, about a nurse who'd exceeded her scope of practice, about patient safety risks that demanded immediate action. By 7:04 a.m., the hospital's insurance investigator, a woman named Patricia Chen who'd been steered toward the investigation by Caldwell's subtle mention that her contract renewal depended on her thoroughness, was reviewing fabricated incident reports that listed Ashley Cooper's name next to expired credentials and unauthorized procedures. The irony was exquisite. Caldwell had doctored the records himself, timestamp by timestamp, creating a paper trail that would convince any administrator that she was a liability waiting to explode. He'd even added a notation: Nurse Cooper administered emergency interventions without physician oversight or written protocol authorization. The lie was so clean it could pass any audit. By 7:31 a.m., Caldwell was walking down the 7th floor corridor where Ashley worked, flanked by the hospital administrator, David Bancroft, and 2 board members whose names hardly mattered because they would do exactly what Caldwell suggested. Their footsteps echoed off the linoleum with the synchronized precision of an execution squad. Ashley was at the medication cart, checking the 7 a.m. vital signs on 3 patients in rooms 336, 339, and 341. She didn't hear them approach. The nursing station's fluorescent lights cast everyone in the same institutional pallor, but Caldwell stepped directly into her line of sight with the satisfaction of a man about to deliver a kill shot he'd been planning for 72 hours. "Ashley Cooper. We need to talk. Now." His voice was calm. That was the dangerous part. It wasn't anger. It was certainty. Ashley turned. Her hands remained exactly where they were. The blood pressure cuff didn't drop. The medication cart didn't shift. She looked at him without expression, a face like stone, and then at Bancroft, then at the board members. She knew. Somehow, in that single breath, she knew. "Good morning, Dr. Caldwell," she said, her voice level as a horizon line. It was the voice of someone who'd been expecting this and had made peace with it 3 hours ago when she couldn't sleep, lying in her apartment, staring at the ceiling, knowing that saving Marcus Webb's life had signed the death warrant on her cover. Caldwell gestured toward the administrative conference room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the downtown Houston skyline. "Let's step into my office. Now." The word "now" carried a subtle emphasis, the kind that made the gathered nurses and orderlies exchange glances. Everyone knew what "nows" meant. Ashley set down the blood pressure cuff. She didn't hurry. She didn't defer. She simply placed the device on the medication cart with the same care she'd used laying down surgical instruments, and then she walked toward the conference room. Caldwell followed, and the procession moved like a cortege, Bancroft in the middle, the board members flanking. The glass doors closed. Through the transparent panels, the gathered staff watched in silence. That was when the real performance began. Inside the conference room, Caldwell laid out the termination letter. It was thick, official, stamped and dated with the seal of the hospital board. Patient safety concerns. Scope of practice violations. Unauthorized administration of emergency interventions without physician authorization. Falsified documentation. The words stacked like concrete blocks. He read them aloud, his voice never rising, never wavering, speaking as if he were simply reciting inventory rather than destroying a career. Effective immediately, your employment with St. Michael's Virginia Hospital is terminated for cause. Security will escort you from the building. You will surrender your hospital identification, access badge, and any materials belonging to this institution. One of the board members, a man Caldwell had called at precisely 6:52 a.m., nodded solemnly. The other one stared at her shoes. Bancroft's face was carefully neutral, the expression of a man who'd been told this was about patient safety and had decided not to ask questions about the supporting documentation. Ashley listened to the entire statement without interrupting. Her jaw was set, but not clenched. That was the thing that made this moment so striking to anyone who understood the language of bodies. The absence of reaction. No tears, no trembling, no voice breaking on a syllable. Just a woman standing in a hospital conference room being fired by a man who destroyed his own career the moment he decided to touch her. "Do you understand?" Caldwell asked, and the question was almost gentle. "I understand," Ashley said. Her voice was exactly the same as it had been in the hallway. No inflection. No change. It was the voice of someone who'd already processed this outcome and filed it into the compartment marked acceptable losses. She stood. She didn't argue. She didn't ask for a second chance or a review or an appeal. She simply stood, extended her hand, and said, "I'll need to collect my things from my locker." Caldwell's expression flickered. Barely. A micro-expression that lasted 1.4 seconds, the kind of microtell that betrayed uncertainty. He'd been expecting protest, or tears, or anger. What he got was compliance. What he got was dignity. "Security will accompany you," he said, and that was when two uniformed security officers appeared at the conference room door. They weren't military. They weren't even ex-law enforcement. They were two men in light blue uniforms who'd been hired to prevent theft and manage disruptive patients. They looked vaguely uncomfortable with the situation, but they gestured toward the elevator, and Ashley nodded, and she walked between them as if she were being escorted to a routine meeting rather than being removed from the building. They took the elevator down to the basement level where the employee lockers were located. The basement smelled like bleach and industrial detergent, the smell of everything being scrubbed clean. The two security officers stood outside the small employee locker room, and Ashley stepped inside alone. Her locker was number 427, a small metal box that had held her shift change clothes and the tarnished challenge coin for the last 11 months. She opened it. She pulled out the scrubs she'd worn that morning, navy blue, the hospital standard, and she placed them on the bench in front of the locker. Then she sat down. Not in defeat. She just sat down and pulled out every item she'd accumulated. 2 pairs of backup scrubs. A hydration bottle. A granola bar she'd bought 2 weeks ago and forgotten. A name badge with her photograph, taken on her first day, her face already giving nothing away. She picked up the challenge coin. She held it for 7 seconds, looking at the tarnished surface, at the barely visible eagle that had been stamped into the metal by a Master Chief Petty Officer who'd held it in her hand before pressing it into the palm of an 8-year-old boy in a dust storm outside Marja. Then she placed the coin on top of that morning's folded scrubs. That evening, after the security escort and after walking out of St. Michael's Virginia Hospital at 8:51 a.m., after driving home and staring at the wall of her apartment for 7 hours without moving, Ashley returned to the hospital alone. Not through the front entrance. Through the service entrance, the one that required a badge she no longer had. She knew the night shift. She knew that Marcus Chen, the night custodian, would be in the basement laundry room at 9:32 p.m., folding the day's linens. She knew he wouldn't ask questions. Marcus had been military once, Army, 2003 to 2007, and he recognized something in her that didn't need explanation. He unlocked the laundry room door and stepped aside. Ashley stepped into the warm, humid space where industrial washers hummed their rhythmic cycle, where the smell of hospital-grade detergent hung so thick you could almost taste it. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in a clinical white. She was wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a grey sweater, and she looked smaller somehow without the scrubs. Not smaller in body. Smaller in the way people look when they've been extracted from their element. She walked to the laundry cart where that morning's scrubs had been collected and processed. They were still warm from the industrial dryer. She pulled out each piece, the 2 backup sets, the folded top, the folded pants, and she began folding them again. Not because they needed folding. Because the repetition meant something. Because her hands needed something to do that wasn't falling apart. She folded the first set. She smoothed the crease. She folded the second set. She smoothed the crease. Fold. Smooth. Fold. Smooth. The rhythm was identical to the rhythm she'd used 21 years ago in a forward operating base in Helmand Province, sitting in a tent at 2 a.m., folding the American flag that had been draped across Petty Officer First Class James Mercer's body before they sealed the body bag. Fold. Smooth. Fold. Smooth. He'd been 24 years old. He'd been shot through the left lung during a patrol in Sanjin Valley, and she'd held his hand for 6 minutes while his oxygen saturation dropped from 94 to 47, and then he was gone, and then the flag came out, and then the folding began. That had been her job then. Her job now was exactly the same, except the object was different. Fabric instead of flags. Civilian clothes instead of ceremonial purpose. But the muscle memory was identical. The hands knew. The hands always knew. She placed the last folded set on the bench, and she placed the tarnished challenge coin on top of the pile, exactly as she'd arranged it in her locker that morning. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Marcus. Chen had disappeared into the hallway, giving her privacy the way military people understand privacy, not by leaving, but by simply not looking. At 10:14 p.m., Ashley Cooper walked out of St. Michael's, Virginia hospital for what she believed would be the final time. She didn't look back at the laundry room. She didn't look back at the basement corridor. She walked past the security desk where the night guard, a different one, someone she'd never seen, nodded at her without question. She pushed through the service exit door into the Houston darkness. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. She stood there for 19 seconds, breathing, feeling the weight of 20 years compress itself into this single moment. She'd been an invisible woman for 2 decades. She was about to become something else entirely, though she didn't know it yet. The phone in her pocket would ring at 11:08 p.m. The CNN special report would begin at 6:56 a.m. The general would arrive at the hospital by noon, walking through those same glass doors, carrying a locked case. But for now, in the darkness outside St. Michael's, there was only silence and the promise of rain and a woman who'd stopped being invisible the moment she'd saved a life she was never supposed to know again. The morning sun filtered through the lobby windows at St. Michael's, casting long shadows across the televisions mounted on the walls. Marcus Webb sat in his hospital wheelchair, his left arm still wrapped in fresh gauze, his right hand gripping the armrest with the kind of tension only Rangers could maintain through pain. The CNN anchor's face filled the screen, and then it happened. A photograph flashed across the report, younger, harder, a woman in desert fatigues with sand still clinging to her boots, her call sign printed beneath the image in bold letters, Phantom. Marcus's breath caught. The anchor's voice carried across the lobby, 20-year-old military cover-up involving a decorated combat medic classified as deceased. New Pentagon documents allege. Marcus's eyes locked on the image. The same hands that had held his 8-year-old self as the building collapsed. The same steady voice that had whispered, don't look down, as dust filled his lungs. Phantom. Not a legend. Real. Here. Alive. He didn't will back to his room. He pulled himself forward, one hand pushing the wheel, his body screaming with every rotation down the corridor toward the administrative floor. 2 floors. 47 steps by his count. The doors to the administrative suite opened with a hydraulic hiss, and there she was, Ashley Cooper, standing silent in the corner of the conference room where the State Medical Board investigators had spread their documents across a mahogany table like evidence at a war crimes tribunal. Dr. Caldwell sat rigid in a leather chair, his face the color of old concrete. 3 investigators flanked him, their notebooks filled with pharmacy timestamps, billing codes, insurance claims that didn't match reality. Marcus pulled the tarnished challenge coin from his pocket. It had lived in his locker for 18 years, the metal worn smooth from his thumb, the insignia barely legible from decades of being gripped during nightmares. He raised his voice, and the room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum their electric prayer. Phantom, he said. The name hung in the air like a bullet in flight. Ashley's head turned, and for the first time since the cafeteria, since the chart scattered across the floor like confetti, something shifted in her eyes. Not recognition. Certainty. She knew. She'd always known. The hospital security guard standing near the door, a Marine veteran with scars that matched his uniform, stepped forward with the kind of precision that only comes from 20 years of standing at attention. His voice carried the weight of official record, Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy. The words didn't sound like an introduction. They sounded like a judgment. The investigators exchanged glances. Dr. Caldwell's skin rippled, a single visible spasm of fear crossing his jaw. And then, 30 seconds later, the elevator arrived. A 2-star general emerged in service dress blues, a uniform sharp enough to cut, her aide carrying a classified file folder sealed with military tape. The general's voice filled the conference room with the kind of authority that made hospital administrators sound like children playing dress-up. Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper, United States Navy Medical Corps. Classification level has been downgraded for this proceeding. She opened the folder. Her eyes moved down the page, reading aloud each medal as if they were testimony itself. Bronze Star. Dr. Caldwell's knuckles whitened. Silver Star. One investigator's pen stopped mid-note. 2 Purple Hearts. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then she delivered the final blow with the same precision Ashley had used to save Marcus's life at 2 a.m., Navy Cross. Not 1. 3. Marcus's voice cracked when he spoke next, his words aimed at everyone in that room but meant only for Ashley. He told them about Marja. About the marketplace where they'd been buying bread his mother needed. About the building's collapse, 7 tons of concrete and rebar and dust that buried him so completely he couldn't remember where his body ended and the rubble began. He told them about hands that moved through that darkness, that lifted him piece by piece, that covered his face so he wouldn't see the bodies still beneath the stones. He told them how she'd run 2 kilometers carrying him, blood soaking through her uniform, her own leg fractured at the tibia but her voice steady. You're going to be a soldier, Marcus. You're going to be the best soldier I ever trained. He told them he'd kept that promise. Ranger training. Combat deployments. 17 confirmed operations across 4 continents. All of it traced back to this moment, to this room, to the woman who'd refused to let him die in the dark. And as he spoke, Dr. Caldwell's carefully constructed world began its final collapse. The State Medical Board's investigation, initiated to destroy Ashley, had become the instrument of his own annihilation. The pharmacy records they'd subpoenaed to prove her incompetence instead exposed 18 months of systematic fraud. Every medication he'd ordered but never administered. Every procedure billing code that never corresponded to actual treatment. Every kickback payment routed through shell accounts that suddenly became very real when the insurance fraud unit arrived with federal prosecutors. Board member Patricia Weston received a subpoena and immediately lawyered up. Her text messages to Caldwell discussing revenue optimization now became conspiracy charges. The medical supply distributor, facing federal indictment, produced emails detailing the entire arrangement, $50,000 a month in kickbacks, payment schedules, delivery logistics. Every ally Caldwell had cultivated turned against him within 48 hours, each protecting themselves by producing evidence more damaging than the last. By Friday, his medical license was under review. By the following Tuesday, federal prosecutors built their case. By the following Thursday, he was suspended pending investigation. By the Monday after that, his career was officially over. The hospital administrator offered Ashley full reinstatement, back pay at 120%, and a formal written apology that used the phrase grave injustice 3 times. She accepted on one condition: she ran the emergency department. Not as consultant. Not as supervisor. As director. Complete operational autonomy. The administrator, terrified of federal oversight and public scandal, agreed before Ashley finished the sentence. 6 months later, St. Michael's emergency response protocols had improved by 40%. Trauma mortality rates dropped to the lowest in the hospital's 30-year history. Combat veterans transitioning to civilian medicine started requesting transfer to work under Ashley's training program, were traveling through the VA system like a legend, finally becoming official. On her desk in the emergency department, next to the administrative reports and shift schedules, sat 2 challenge coins. The first was tarnished from 18 years of being gripped during nightmares, the one Marcus had pressed into her palm the day before the explosion. The second was pristine, its edges sharp, its insignia perfectly stamped, presented to her by Marcus Webb himself at his promotion ceremony to captain in the 75th Ranger Regiment. He'd pressed it into her palm exactly as she once had for him, a ritual complete, a circle closed. Dr. Caldwell sold supplemental insurance from a folding table outside a strip mall on Route 45, his medical license permanently revoked, federal probation preventing him from ever practicing medicine again. His network had evaporated like morning fog. His connections meant nothing once they stopped protecting him. His arrogance, which had felt invincible 3 months earlier, now felt like the mark of a man who'd never understood that the quietest person in the room might be the one holding it all together. When young nurses asked Ashley how she'd survived 20 years in hiding, she'd turn that tarnished challenge coin in her fingers, letting the light catch its worn surfaces, and she'd tell them what she told every veteran she trained. The ones who came in broken and left healed. The ones who woke up screaming and learned to sleep again. True heroism is what you do when the world stops watching, she'd say. Her voice had changed by then, commanding without trying, precise without effort, the kind of voice that made you stand straighter just from hearing it. It was the voice of someone who'd stopped pretending. On her wall hung a single photograph in a simple frame, 8-year-old Marcus in a Baghdad orphanage, holding her hand, the day before the explosion that changed both their lives. Sometimes, during quiet moments between shifts, she'd look at that photograph and the 2 challenge coins on her desk and she'd understand something that no investigation could prove: she hadn't saved Marcus Webb that day in Marja. He'd saved her. They'd saved each other. And that was the kind of heroism that no medal could measure, no rank could contain, no amount of time could ever diminish. Hit like if this story got you. And tell me, have you ever been underestimated at work, only to prove them all wrong? I read every comment. Subscribe if you haven't already.